Baseball, the classic American pastime, of which I know very little outside of the I Don't Dance number from High School Musical 2. I guess I've been to a couple Dodgers games, I was in Chicago when the Cubs won the World Series, but beyond that, not much. You throw the ball, you run real fast, you catch the ball, and maybe if you're lucky, a cat will get lost on the field and distract everybody. What else is there? Well, apparently a lot, because baseball history is full of wacky characters, and perhaps one of the wackiest of all was a guy known as Rube Waddell. From crocodile wrestling, chasing fire trucks mid-game, and his notorious drunkenness to his legendary baseball skills and knack for saving lives, Rube Waddell had one hell of a life. And a hell of a criminal record, too. Come learn with me. But before we get into it, let's hear from today's sponsor, Babbel. I took French for 2 years in high school and got straight C's. So ever since, I've had a very basic understanding of French, but I've always wanted to improve on it. So I'm so excited that Babbel is today's sponsor. Babbel is a language learning app with multiple ways to learn a language so you can get into speaking a new language intuitively and conversationally. It works with short 10-minute lessons, so it's easy to fit into a busy schedule, something that's perfect for me because I struggle with that. Plus, Babbel can get you started with a quick placement quiz to see what knowledge you may already have so you can get started right where you need to be. The program focuses on important conversational skills with tips about the customs and culture about the language that you're learning. Like for example, it made sure to reinforce what pronouns and greetings you need to use in French for various situations, casual or formal. Honestly, the lessons are bringing back quite a lot of knowledge that I'd forgotten too, so it's really exciting to see how much I still know and how easy it is to learn more. Start speaking a new language in 3 weeks with Babbel's language learning lessons developed by real language teachers and get up to 65% off your subscription with a 20-day money-back guarantee by visiting my link in the description below. Thank you so much to Babbel for sponsoring this video, and now let's get back to learning about the buck-wild life of Rube Waddell. Rube Waddell is commonly dubbed one of the greatest pitchers of all time. First of all, he was a hulking refrigerator of a man. He reportedly had very large hands that could encircle a baseball with his fingers as the ordinary man could a billiard ball, according to John McGraw, and he was ambidextrous but played left-handed, pitching the ball at such high speeds and controlled curves it took most hitters off guard, and injured a few too. According to Alan Levy, in 1903, Rube struck out 301 batters while no other pitcher in the league topped 175. In 1904, he struck out an incredible 349, walking just 81. Rube never walked 100 in any season, and even Christy Mathewson broke triple figures once. Rube's 349 strikeout mark would not be broken until 1965, and then only after the season had been lengthened. God, I wish I understood the magnitude of those numbers, but from the looks of it, sport people agree that this is super impressive. But though his skill in baseball was extremely admirable, what made me want to talk about him was rather just how strange he was off the field and on it. In fact, he was so strange that he's one of the first celebrities to have earned sensationalized gossip tabloid treatment from the papers, and it wasn't hard to get these stories, though a few of them ended up being a little bit exaggerated. People knew Rube, and he was weird. But let's back up a bit and regroup with our friend Rube long before he stood on the baseball field. Way back in the beginning. Rube Waddell was born on Friday, October the 13th, 1876, because of course he was born on Friday, October 13th, in the rural countryside around Bradford, Pennsylvania. Now, Rube wasn't actually his real name. He was born George Edward Waddell. In the late 19th century, Rube was used as a sort of derogatory name for gullible country boys or just country folk in general. George became Rube during one of his first days on the playing field in Franklin in 1896 when catcher Jack Nelson yelled out to him, "All right, Rube, let's see what you got." And it stuck. But Rube was called Rube long before that too. One of his childhood friends, Isaac Allen, once recalled, "We called him Rube because he was a rube." Rube Waddell was definitely a gullible country boy, but despite popular belief, he wasn't exactly uneducated. He did actually finish his schooling. Maybe he wasn't great at it, but I mean, he graduated. School just wasn't his primary concern. Rube's biggest interests were baseball, fishing, and chasing fire trucks. He had always had a fascination with fire trucks. During his adult life, it was well known that if a fire truck drove by the field, he would run off in the middle of the game to go chase it. As a child in the 1870s, he once strayed away from his family home and wandered into a firehouse where he stayed for 3 days until his parents found him. Rube had always loved baseball, a thing that he picked up on at a young age when he figured out that he was extremely good at throwing rocks and shooting two things that made him an incredible pitcher. He was not incredible at actually attending games, though. Frequently, he would be missing from games because he instead decided to go fishing. Sometimes he would walk right off the field in the middle of the game to go fishing. He was also extremely dedicated to firefighting, despite not actually being a firefighter. From a young age, he made it a habit to go assist any active fire. If a fire broke out during a game, he would simply run right off the field and tear his uniform off, because sometimes he'd already be wearing red firefighting appropriate underwear underneath, like baseball firefighting Superman. When his managers forbade him from wearing the red underwear, trying to keep him from firefighting during games, he was like, okay, and went commando under his uniform instead. As you can probably imagine, this led to him running off the field and stripping naked because a fire broke out, a thing that he would continue to do until the end of his life. So as you can see, his weird antics were starting to earn him a reputation around town. I mean, who doesn't love a local eccentric? After a failed attempt to play for the Pittsburgh Pirates, Waddell ended up playing for Volant College in Lawrence County. He gained such a reputation for baseball prowess that one day a baseball team from Mercer literally rolled up and kidnapped Waddell at gunpoint. He agreed to pitch for them, for which he was paid $1 and then released. Sometimes he would leave the field after pitching, not by walking out, but by walking on his hands or cartwheeling. But his college pitching days ended in 1897, after which he was arrested mid-game by the National Guard, because apparently he had joined the Guard because he thought the uniforms were cool and then promptly went AWOL to play baseball. So he hung out in prison until one day there was a massive explosion when someone threw a bunch of ammo into a stove. Someone with a very strong and accurate pitch. Well, regardless, the Guard released Waddell so that they wouldn't have to deal with him anymore. Rube's career really took off when he signed with the Louisville Colonels for $500. He continued doing what he did best, doing cartwheels and handsprings to and from the mound, arguing with people, making jokes and funny animal noises, and accruing more fans than ever. Newspapers started picking up on him at this point, but due to Rube's antics and his drinking, he would be shuffled around various teams for basically his whole career. He got traded around so much that it would actually be tedious for me to mention every single time, so forgive me. But after some drama and a stint playing in Canada, things finally started to pick up again. He had a sizable fan base by this point. Some fans would cut off pieces of his clothing to keep for good luck, and his antics just got weirder. Apparently, at some point while off duty, Rube captured a flock of geese and taught most of them how to jump rope. Where this man got his ideas, no one will ever know. It was around this time that Rube got married to his longtime girlfriend, Florence, who, by all accounts, was also pretty weird. Good for them. But Rube continued getting in trouble with his team managers and was suspended indefinitely after injuring his arm while teaching some kids to throw a curveball by throwing a brick. This was kind of a pattern with Rube. He would very frequently wander off or not show up to games because he was off playing with a group of Sandlot kids instead. As fellow baseball player Sam Crawford once said, it really never mattered to Rube whether he was pitching in the big leagues or on a sandlot with a bunch of kids. It was all the same. To Rube, baseball truly was only a game. It just wasn't that serious for him. That's why he was so inclined to goof off or not show up at all. Everything in life to Rube Waddell was a very simple decision. What he does next is merely what seems like the most fun or most interesting at the moment. It's only a side factor to Rube that he's so good at pitching. But that's all it took to catch the interest of the manager of the Milwaukee Brewers, Connie Mack. After quite a lot of convincing, Rube agreed to leave Punxsutawney for Milwaukee. One of the first things he did when he got there was obviously go find the best fishing spots. He spent his time on the Brewers fishing, then playing a game, and then fishing some more. He fished so much that the papers were reporting on it. Connie Mack didn't care as long as it wasn't affecting Rube's pitching. In fact, it turned out that Connie Mack was probably one of the only people in the world who could manage Rube in the first place. Rube had always been volatile and unpredictable on other teams, but under Mack's management, he improved a lot. This became incredibly apparent when he went back to play for the Pittsburgh Pirates again. He had bad blood with the manager Fred Clark that made him even weirder. After a bad game in Brooklyn, Rube brought a hatchet to one of the stadium's bleacher entrances and attacked a fence post with it over and over for over 30 minutes. Part of the issue was the fact that he just wasn't playing as well due to hand burns that he sustained while fighting a fire back in Wisconsin, where he ran into the burning building to save a red wagon for a crying little boy and burned himself on the metal. By this point, he was so famous that fans would come to games from all over just to taunt him or try to distract him or yell at him to do something funny, which wasn't hard to do, and allegedly you could just show him a shiny object and he'd run off. Obviously, Rube continued to be impossible to control, to the point where his father at one point had to meet with the Pirates management and said, "If my son acts a little odd at times, please understand, since I am a little odd myself." It wasn't enough. In the end, Rube got sold to the Chicago orphans for the price of one cigar. And it's a good thing too, because Chicago loved Rube. He quickly became a frequenter of the theater district and befriended so many actors that he was allowed to hang out backstage, which was probably a bad idea because one night during a production of The James Boys in Missouri, right as the two main characters are about to kiss, Rube knocked over an arsenal of weapons backstage that were loaded with blanks, 40 of which all fired at once. The main actor quickly improv'd, "My God, the sheriff is approaching, he is shooting at my sentinels," and then ran backstage with a bunch of stagehands where they all collectively grabbed Rube and threw him out the back door and locked him out. But his time in Chicago didn't last. One day he went missing and was finally found in Wisconsin, where he had joined a random team there because they would give him 6 days a week to go fishing. Of course. Apparently he left Chicago because he didn't like having morning practices. "It is better to be a big toad in a small pond and fish," Rube said, which probably made a lot of sense to him. His priorities weren't straight, which was clear enough when Florence left the marriage that year. Eventually, though, he ended up in Los Angeles, which at the time in 1902 was literally a small town, and signed with the Western League there. The Western League, in my opinion, had some pretty choice team names. Outside of Rube's new team, the Los Angeles Lulus, there was also the Sacramento Mosquitoes, or the Skeeters, and the San Francisco Has-Beens. Rube was just as much a hit and a liability out west as he was in Chicago. He played well, got into fights, fought fires, and fished, but it wasn't long before good old Connie Mack came to LA to haul Rube back east with him. While on a game tour with Mack's team, the A's, Rube shot to superstardom, all while causing trouble along the way. Mack decided to take the team to Jacksonville, Florida, where Rube and his buddy Aussie Schreckengost, who he called Shrek, got up to no good. Now, Shrek was Rube's biggest partner in crime. He was also the only guy on the team who could handle being Rube's roommate on the road. Except, apparently, when Rube indulged in his habit of eating animal crackers in bed. Back then, it was pretty standard for roommates in sports to share a bed while traveling. It wasn't considered gay, it was just convenient. But Shrek couldn't stand sleeping in a bed full of crumbs, to the point where Rube had to sign in his baseball contract that he wouldn't eat animal crackers in bed. Apparently, other crackers weren't an issue, just the animal ones. God. Anyways, so down in Florida, where good things happen never of the time, two besties found an ostrich farm. And if you've seen my video on LA's exotic animal farms, you probably can figure out where this is headed. Rube decided to ride the ostriches without permission. Bad idea. Rube Waddell was again 6'2" and over 200 pounds. The ostriches did not appreciate the passenger. Rube and Shrek got kicked out of the farm. But of course, this is Florida, so they promptly found some gators. Shocking nobody, Rube got bit by a gator. Luckily, it wasn't his pitching hand. But was this enough to keep him away from gators? Of course not! Rube had had a taste of wild animal excitement and he wanted more. So back to the ostrich farm he went and began climbing into the gator enclosures to wrestle the gators. He would then repeatedly continue to go wrestle gators unprompted to the point where the professional gator wrestler at the farm, yes, there were professional gator wrestlers, please for the love of God go watch my other video, had to tell Connie Mack to keep Rube the hell out of the gator enclosures. The man threatened, if he does that again, I'll slit his throat. This put an end to Rube's gator wrestling, but not his unauthorized thrill-seeking. It wasn't long before he found a motorcycle racetrack there and started riding motorcycles. Hilariously, people liked him there so much that they made him a track official. In true Rube fashion, though, he disappeared once again after a successful game against the Jacksonville Comers. Hey, Victorian baseball. Hey, Victorian baseball. What's going on with your team names? Anyways, Rube was AWOL for so long that they gave up looking for him. He finally reappeared on the street one night, leading a vaudeville band, in uniform and everything. His team wasn't even mad at this point, but what did make people mad was the fact that later in 1903, Rube got married. Again, strike two, and once again it did not go well, both in the marriage and on the field. On one occasion, he responded to taunting from fans by climbing up into the stands and beating the shit out of some guy. Later on, Rube was arrested while bartending in Camden because his poor wife had been turned out of her boarding house due to Rube's overdue bills. Turns out he wasn't sending her much food either, aside from partially eaten bags of peanuts that he found left behind at the ballparks. He was never even really home. While in prison, Rube got absolutely humiliated by the press and talked through by everyone imaginable to the point where he started crying and swore that he'd change his ways. He would not. He continued to play poorly and not show up to games. Connie Mack dropped him from the team. As Mack would later go on to say, "That Waddell, if only he had ever grown up, my goodness me." But don't worry, because obviously Mack accepted Rube back on the A's the very next year, and Rube performed extremely well that season, but it didn't take long for things to get wild with him again due to marital issues. He wasn't living with his wife, and a disagreement led to him beating up his in-laws, which led to him being attacked by their massive dog, who took a huge bite out of his pitching arm. Rube thereafter, logically, fled to New Orleans with his team to go celebrate Mardi Gras. The dog bite somehow made no impact on his pitching, and he continued to play incredibly on the field. But as always, drama must ensue, and ensue it did in 1905 when teammate Andy Coakley made the mistake of wearing a straw hat after Labor Day. Okay, so backstory. In this time period, men's headwear was extremely important and followed certain customs. You may have heard of don't wear white after Labor Day, but don't wear a straw hat after Labor Day was a serious rule. Labor Day marked the shift from summer wear, where you don straw hats, to winter wear, where you instead wear wool or felt hats. And wearing a straw hat after Labor Day could get you in serious trouble. Like, if you wore one on the street, a stranger might come up and yank it right off your head and smash it. One article in the Pittsburgh Press from 1910 wrote, "If the informality would become general, there will sure to be a number of obstinate gentlemen, most likely with English blood in their veins, who will coolly proceed to treat the fun-making as a physical assault and defend themselves in a manner which will spoil the fun for all concerned." I knew it. It's the English's fault. Well, things got more serious over time, and in 1922, a full-on riot over straw hats took place in New York City, when a gang of men decided to go around the docks, stealing and destroying the straw hats of the dock workers. A massive fight broke out and continued to the next night. Ripleys writes, "Teen boys roamed the streets with large sticks, some with nails protruding on the ends to help hook off the straw hats of people's heads. Anyone who resisted was beaten, and several men had to be treated for their injuries. Many of the boys were under age 15, so they were not arrested. Their punishment? A good spanking." As the fight spread through Manhattan, some people were beaten so badly they had to be hospitalized over nothing more than a straw hat. But let's go back 20 years to Rube again. Andy Coakley showed up to the train station with the team wearing a straw hat after Labor Day, and Rube couldn't help himself. He charged at Coakley, which Coakley tried to avoid, which led to Rube thinking that he was fighting back. Now Rube was pissed. The other players tried to stop him, but remember, he was huge, and so it was kind of like flicking ants off of his shoulders. But in the end, everyone fell over and the fight stopped, but Rube had injured his shoulder in the brawl. He couldn't pitch, and the A's failed to win where they otherwise would have, because of a straw hat. For the next 50 years, poor Andy Coakley could never escape people pestering him about the straw hat that kept Rube Waddell out of the 1905 World Series. I would argue that Rube Waddell kept Rube Waddell out of the World Series. Things started getting kind of bad after this. Compounding injuries mixed with Rube's drinking problems and inability to recover and rest, nor put up with pain maturely, meant that he grew irate and depressed and started to perform poorly. Meh performance for Rube was still miles better than most players, but people could tell that he wasn't doing his best and it was pissing them off. His weird antics were starting to get old. People just wanted their team to win. The team wanted to win too. Things were tense, and Rube continued to suck for the rest of the season, so bad that his career career under Connie Mack's management came to an end when Mack sold him to the St. Louis Browns. Rube, ever a traveler and adventure seeker, went to Alabama and did some shark fishing before finally returning to Massachusetts, where things would continue to go downhill. Rube's time with the Browns was as up and down as the rest of his career. Sometimes he was amazing, sometimes he was bad, sometimes he just wasn't there at all. His wife began divorce proceedings, and the two settled everything just in time for Rube to marry a third time. Strike three. This was after, but not related to, a completely buck-wild and truly offensive personals ad that Rube put out in the Scranton Tribune in 1908, just before his divorce, that read, "Unkissed girl sought by Rube Waddell. Girls, here is the chance to marry. Man, Rube Waddell. Occupation, pitcher for the Browns. Income $4,000 a year. Previous condition of servitude. Relict of a grass widow. Habits, periodical water drinker. Fond of fires, skirts, and domestic excitement. Disposition, easygoing. Says he will be good to the girl who will be good to him. Amusements, fond of harmless innocent games and exhilarating. Motive, must marry and settle down to when bonus hedges promises him if he wins 30 games. Physique, splendid girl, splendid. Has a bear hug which will make any woman happy. When not under the influence of sinister forces, is docile and affectionate." Sinister forces. Allowance will turn over to wife 1,000 yearly for clothes. Qualifications, peroxide blondes preferred, women with children need not apply. Bars to matrimony, only the unkissed and the unhugged need apply. Rube positively objects to girls who have spooned with other fellows. Age, anywhere from 14 to 40. Ugh. Parents' consent required. Girls must pay for license to prove her sincerity. Color, white, brown, or yellow. Widows, in order for widows to win the favor of Rube, they must furnish proof to the effect that their husbands were hung. Grass and sod widows have too much of a habit of bragging about the virtues of their former husbands. Let them show me their former lord and masters were hung to a sour apple tree, and I will take them under consideration. Experience, the less experience in matrimonial matters the better. God deliver me from a too wise woman, he says. Remarks, maids with wooden legs will be frozen out. Heart whole and fancy free is Rube's motto. False teeth, no woman who wears a half or whole set of false teeth will be accepted. Bridges and other said fillings not objected to. Rats in the hair, like rats in the belfry, are not desirable. Paint, maidens who paint or whitewash their faces will not be eligible to this matrimonial handicap. Powder, moderate amount of powder may be used. Oh, buddy. Come on. Well, regardless, Rube actually did land a third wife, unrelated to the newspaper ad. They married when she was 19 and Rube was 33, at least not 14. Very few were amused with the whole affair, and the papers breathlessly questioned both parties on how they could possibly have such an age difference, to which the couple defended themselves and the whole issue fizzled out. Rube promptly fractured his pitching arm, took up drinking again, much to the distress of his wife. One day, things came to a head, and he hit her, which had him taken to court and fined. People in every corner were getting sick of dealing with Rube's antics, and he was unceremoniously dropped from the Browns. Despite all this, the couple stayed together and were eager to try and get Rube accepted back into the major leagues, and, well, I think you and I both know that it wasn't meant to last. Rube took up drinking again, and his wife left him. They never saw each other again. Good for her. Rube began hitting up every distillery he could so he could drink, and then he'd go find a fake mustache to disguise himself so he could go back and drink more, as if that was gonna fool anyone. He was 34 now, getting older, and the effects of long-time drinking and athletics were starting to take their toll. He grew weaker, lost some teeth, lost his drive even. I mean, it's really, really sad. It's not even funny. Addiction is devastating for all parties involved. Rube said, "I don't pretend to say that I have been at my best for several years. Still, the way my arm has been feeling, I'm afraid that I have nothing left. The trouble now is something that I have never before experienced, and it is worrying me considerably. Of course the pain may wear away, but I have a hunch that something is wrong in that elbow, and that is something the doctors cannot fix." Rube went to stay in Kentucky, where the winter of 1913 saw unbelievably bad rainstorms. In early early January, the floods came. Ever inclined to be a hero, Rube's adrenaline came back and he snapped into action. He did a lot of work in the town of Hickman, sandbagging and such, so much that he was named deputy sheriff and the fire chief. But he had spent so long that winter standing in icy cold waters overworking himself, he caught pneumonia and never fully recovered. This didn't stop him from continuing to try and be a hero. In March, while at a baseball practice, Rube heard a fire siren and, of course, ran off. He stole a pony and rode towards the fire on it bareback, stripped down completely naked. When he got to the fire, he grabbed an axe and got on the roof of the house and chopped the roof off somehow while stark naked. No one was sure why he did this, considering the fire was contained in the chimney, but he seemed proud of himself, so he did help rebuild the roof later. His condition continued to worsen and worsen, though. He developed pleurisy and suffered a lung hemorrhage. During a game in April, his leg got spiked and infected, which gave him blood poisoning. Any normal human being would have been taken out by any one of these things. I know I would have. But this is Rube Waddell we're talking about, and he just kept going. One July, in the middle of a game, Rube collapsed on the field and later passed out after the next, which proved to be his last. But if you think that's the end of Rube's adventures, you clearly have not been paying close enough attention. In 1913, while fishing in Minnesota, Rube heard of a boat that capsized in a nearby lake, and Rube dove in to retrieve the body of one of the victims. Then he ended up in Virginia, where he would break into the zoo enclosures to play with the black bears. By November, Rube had caught tuberculosis. He went to stay with his sister on her ranch in Texas in an attempt to have the warmer climate heal his lungs, but it was too late. He was just too sick. So they sent him to the San Antonio Sanitarium, where he laid in bed, really reflecting on his choices for once in his life. He wrote a letter to young baseball fans of the nation saying, "I had my chance and a good one it was. Many boys may have a better one ahead of them than I had. If they will leave the booze alone, they won't have any trouble. I am not a very good preacher, but keep away from booze and cigarettes." Rube died on April Fool's Day, 1914. I want to discourage you all from trying to pathologize or diagnose Rube Waddell. I certainly haven't, and I think it's inappropriate. All we can do now as people looking back on history is judge him not by whatever we think was wrong with him, but rather by his actions. He is certainly one of the greatest pitchers in baseball history, and certainly the strangest. He was a deeply volatile person who saved innumerable people's lives and gave people a good laugh, but he also hurt quite a few people too, not the least of which is 3 wives. There's no such thing as a perfect person, much less hero in the annals of history. Why would Rube Waddell be any different? But God, people do wonder, what if he was different? Would he have soared even higher? We'll never know. So what is there to learn from the story of Rube Waddell? Well, I think Rube himself said it best. Have fun where you can, enjoy to the fullest everything that you love, and keep away from booze and cigarettes. If you'd like to learn more about Rube Waddell, of course, as usual, check my sources section, but the biggest help I had with this video was Rube Waddell by Alan Levy. If you like baseball, it's worth a read. And so until next time, wash thy hands, wear thy mask, and don't go chasing fire engines.